Hey friends, welcome back to Align Vitality. Today we're closing out our series I've been calling The Weight of the Chair. And I want to start by saying something before we go anywhere else. Thank you. Thank you for staying with me through this series, for being willing to go to the real places, the loneliness, the anxiety, the weight of carrying things alone, the season that almost ended my leadership career, for listening with grace the way that you have. The messages that I've received were really meaningful in response to the podcast series, so I really appreciate you and other listeners and just that message of support. Now, I'd originally planned this episode to be kind of a toolkit, a practical, here's what I do episode full of very specific strategies and clinical recommendations. But the more I sat with that, the more I felt like so much of what belongs in that toolkit has already been woven in to this series. And rather than repeat what's already been said, I want to use our final episode for something that I think matters a little bit more. Not a list of things to do, but more a vision of who you become when you do them. Because I think that's where the series has really been building toward. Not a better stress management plan, but a different kind of leader. So today, I want to cast that vision a bit. I want to describe what I have seen and experienced on the other side of doing the inner work. What changes when a leader has done the honest, sometimes painful, definitely countercultural work of tending to herself, her nervous system, her identity, her relationship with God, and with her own limits. What really becomes possible, what becomes different, and who she becomes. I believe that vision, the concrete, specific, lived reality of what changes, is what makes the work worth doing. And I think you deserve to hear that clearly. So let's close this series out well. Do you want to recharge your energy, restore your mental clarity, and finally feel like yourself again? Well, you are in the right place. Welcome to Align Vitality, the podcast that offers faith and functional health strategies for high-achieving, health-conscious women in midlife who want to heal from chronic stress, body and spirit. I'm your host, Tanya Engesether, a certified functional health practitioner, Christian life coach, and fellow midlife woman who knows what it's like to look strong on the outside while struggling silently on the inside. Here, we get real about anxiety, brain fog, burnout, hormone shifts, and the hidden toll of chronic stress. And more importantly, we talk about the path to healing. Each week, you'll find practical strategies and faith-fueled encouragement to help you restore your God-given energy, calm your nervous system, and reclaim peace in this season of life. If you're ready to stop pushing through and start thriving in the abundant life you were created for, let's get after it. This is Align Vitality. Okay, before I cast the vision forward, I want to spend a moment looking back, because I think the arc of this series reveals something important. We started with the loneliness of leadership, the specific, confusing isolation that lives inside leadership, even when you're surrounded by people. Then we moved on to anxiety, the physiological reality of what happens in the nervous system when you carry sustained responsibility for outcomes and people. Then the weight of what can't be shared, the things you sometimes carry alone, in confidence, in professionalism, and in the specific solitude of the leadership seat. And then the hardest one, the season of me almost quitting my leadership role, the wound of having your character discounted in your most impossible season, the anger that had nowhere to go, the identity rupture that came from discovering that your sense of self was more dependent on others' assessments than you'd really fully understood. And through it all, a thread. The same thread running underneath every episode. The question of what you are anchored to. When the loneliness is acute, what holds you? When the anxiety is loud, what quiets it? When what you're carrying has nowhere to go, where does it go? When your identity is called into question by the people you invested in most, what remains? That is what this series has really been about. Not leadership strategies, but foundation. The question of what you are building your leadership on, what your sense of self rests on, what is present with you in the chair when everything else gets hard. And the vision I want to cast today, the picture of what changes when you do the inner work, is really the picture of what becomes possible when that foundation is solid. Let me paint a little picture. She's not a different person than you. She's not had an easier leadership journey. In many cases, she's had a harder one. She's been through the loneliness and the anxiety and the almost quitting. She carries scars. She still has days that are hard, but something is different about the way she carries it. And I want to describe specifically what that difference looks like, because I think it is more concrete and more accessible than most people imagine when they hear phrases like emotional regulation or leading from wholeness. This is not abstract. This is real and it is visible. She is present. The regulated leader is actually in the room. Not performing presence while in her mind is 3 conversations ahead. Not managing her image while appearing to be engaged. Not monitoring every face in the room for signs of approval or disapproval while simultaneously trying to facilitate a meeting. Actually present. Because when the nervous system is not running a continuous background threat assessment, scanning for who's upset, what might go wrong, how she's being perceived, the cognitive and emotional bandwidth that was consumed by that scanning now becomes available for genuine attention. She can listen more fully because she's not half listening while managing her internal state. She can read the room more accurately because she's not filtering what she sees through a lens of anxiety about what it means about her. She can respond rather than react because the pause between stimulus and response, the pause that the regulated nervous system provides, allows her to choose rather than simply fire. Presence sounds simple, but it is extraordinarily rare, and it changes everything about how a team experiences their leader. She takes feedback differently. Now, this one is close to home for me, given what I've shared in previous episodes. The regulated leader can receive critical feedback, genuinely receive it, without it necessarily becoming a verdict on her personhood. She can hear, "I don't think that decision was right," and consider it honestly rather than experiencing it as a threat to her identity. She can hear, "Your communication in that meeting landed badly," and she can sit with it, examining what is useful, setting down what is not, without catastrophizing or defending or deflecting. She can hear disapproval without experiencing it as danger, because her sense of self is not contingent on agreement. She knows who she is. She knows what she values. She knows whose assessment ultimately matters. And from that groundedness, criticism becomes information rather than attack. Now, that doesn't mean she's indifferent. She cares very deeply about leading well. That is part of what makes her a good leader. But caring about it and being destabilized by feedback about it are 2 very different things. A regulated leader has learned the difference, and that difference changes how she develops as a leader because she can actually learn from the feedback rather than just survive it. She sets limits without apologizing for them. The regulated leader has a different relationship with the word no, not because she's become less caring or less servant-oriented, because she has developed a more honest understanding of what genuine care requires. She knows that unlimited availability is not generosity. It is a slow depletion that eventually leaves everyone, including the people she leads, with a version of her that has nothing real left to give. She knows that saying yes to everything is not service. It is people-pleasing. The anxious management of others' disappointment dressed up as a leadership virtue. And she has learned, not without discomfort, not without the guilt that comes with every early no, that the limit is not a failure to care. It's actually an act of it. She says no to the meeting that does not need her and yes to the rest that will make her more present for the meetings that do. She says no to the responsibility that belongs to someone else and yes to developing that person's capacity to carry it. She says no to the pace that is consuming her and yes to the sustainable rhythm that allows her to lead for the long haul. Her no is honest and her yes is full. And her team can then trust both because they come from a grounded, integrated place. She stays grounded when the emotional temperature rises. Every leader knows what it feels like when the room gets hot, when the conflict surfaces unexpectedly, when someone says something that lands badly in a meeting, when the emotional temperature spikes in a way that demands a response. The unregulated leader responds to that spike with her own spike or with a protective shutdown, a withdrawal, or performance of composure that everyone in the room can feel is performance. The regulated leader stays. Not because she's unmoved, but because her nervous system has enough baseline regulation to tolerate the activation of the moment without being swept away by it. Now, she can feel the heat, but she can stay present in it. She can notice her own response without being controlled by it. She can choose her next move rather than simply reacting to the stimulus. This is the ability to be genuinely present to the full emotional reality of a situation because the internal foundation is stable enough to hold it. That capacity to stay grounded when everything around you is not is one of the most essential and rare gifts that a leader can bring to her team. And it's not a personality trait, it is a practice, a cultivated capacity. The fruit of the ongoing, unglamorous, deeply worthwhile work of tending to the nervous system and the identity underneath it. She leads from overflow rather than depletion. This might be the most important shift of all. The regulated leader gives from a place that is genuinely full, not performing fullness while running on empty. She has invested in the practices that fill her up. The rest, the nourishment, the movement, the prayer, the relationships. Not perfectly, not without seasons of falling short, but consistently enough that there is something real to draw from when the demands of leadership arrive. And the quality of what she gives from that full place is fundamentally different from what comes out of depletion. Not just the quantity, but the quality. The presence, the creativity, the genuine care, the capacity to hold complexity without collapsing it, the patience in the difficult conversations, the generosity of spirit that makes people feel seen rather than managed. These are not available at the bottom of the tank. They come from the middle, the top, the place that is genuinely resourced. And getting to that place and maintaining it is the work. So what changes in the relationship with your team? I think it's important to talk about this because I think leadership is ultimately about relationships, and the inner work eventually shows up there most visibly. What happens eventually, hopefully, is that trust deepens. Certainly not immediately, not because you announce that you have done the work, but gradually, organically, because the behavior changes. The team that's been led by an anxious, approval-seeking, inconsistent, under pressure leader and then begins to experience a leader who's regulated, boundaried, present, and honest, eventually begins to notice. They may not quite understand what is different. They may not be able to articulate the shift, but they eventually should be able to feel it. The meetings feel more honest because the leader's composure is real rather than performed. The difficult conversations feel more productive because the leader can hold the tension without shutting it down prematurely. The limits feel more trustworthy because they are consistent rather than reactive. Trust is built through consistency over time. And a regulated leader is more consistent, not because she has figured everything out, but because her responses are coming from a stable internal place rather than from the mood of her nervous system on any given moment or day. What happens with that is that psychological safety increases. Now, this is a term that's become almost overused in leadership conversations, but I want to reclaim what it actually means. Psychological safety is not the absence of challenge or discomfort. It is the presence of a container that can hold challenge and discomfort without becoming destabilizing or punitive. When a leader's own nervous system is regulated, when she's not threatened by disagreement, not destabilized by conflict, not reactive to challenge, she creates a container that her team can feel. They can bring the hard thing. They can say the honest thing. They can disagree without catastrophizing about what it will cost them. Not because the leader said the right words about psychological safety, but because her regulated presence communicates it consistently over time. Then the leader's investment in people changes quality. There's a kind of relational investment in leadership that's actually driven by anxiety rather than genuine care. The anxious leader invests in people because she needs them to be okay, because their okayness is part of what regulates her, because if the people around her are satisfied and grateful and well, she can breathe. That investment, as genuine as it may feel, is actually entangled with her own need. And the people she leads can sense the entanglement, even if they can't name it. It is why the investment sometimes creates a kind of dependence rather than growth, why it can tip into overfunctioning, why the leader ends up doing too much for people who could do more for themselves. The regulated leader invests differently. She invests from genuine desire for the other person's growth, not from her own need for their flourishing to confirm her worth. That distinction changes everything about how the investment lands. It is genuinely freeing rather than subtly binding. It develops capacity in others rather than creating reliance, and it is sustainable because it doesn't drain the leader in the same way that approval dependence does. So what changes in the relationship with yourself? Well, you stop performing for yourself. One of the least discussed aspects of people-pleasing patterns in leadership is the way it turns inward. Not just performing for others, but performing for the internal critic, the internal audience that's constantly evaluating whether you handled something right, whether you said the right thing, whether the decision was good enough, whether you are good enough. A regulated leader still reflects on her leadership. Honest self-assessment is part of leading well, but the reflection is curious rather than punitive. It asks, what can I learn from this, rather than what does that say about my worth? Then the inner critic quiets, not completely, not forever, but enough that there is more space, more grace, more honest self-compassion in the moments that didn't go so perfectly. And that inner quiet has a physiological dimension because the constant self-evaluation and self-criticism are themselves stress responses that keep your HPA axis activated. When the inner critic quiets, the body exhales at a level that external circumstances alone can't produce. You're able to recover faster. The hard moments still happen. The difficult conversations, the team conflict, the decisions that don't go the way you hoped, the seasons of complexity that leadership always eventually produces, but recovery looks different. An unregulated leader carries the aftermath of hard moments for days, sometimes weeks, sometimes months, and sometimes years, replaying, second-guessing, monitoring for ongoing consequences, adding the weight of the aftermath to the weight of the original event. In contrast, the regulated leader processes and moves through, not by suppressing, by having the physiological and the emotional capacity to complete the cycle, to name what happened, to feel what it produced, to bring it to God, to let it move through the body through breath and movement and honest conversation, and arrive at the other side. Recovery does not mean indifference. It means that the hard thing doesn't get to live in your nervous system indefinitely. It means you can process it fully and then put it down. That capacity for recovery is one of the most undervalued capacities in leadership, because it is the capacity that allows you to show up fresh to the next hard thing rather than carrying the weight of the previous one. You thereby have a more honest relationship with your limits. Now, this does not come early or perfectly in a leader's journey, but eventually through practice, through experience, through the slow accumulation of evidence that limits don't collapse the work or the relationships or the mission, she can develop a relationship with her own limits or boundaries that is honest rather than adversarial. She knows what she can sustain, what she can't, what the seasons require and what they don't, where her genuine capacity is and where the performance of capacity is covering an empty tank. And she can operate from that honest knowledge rather than from the fantasy of limitlessness that drives so many high-capacity women into depletion. She's a better judge of what is genuinely hers to carry and a better steward of the capacity she has. Now, let's talk about the most foundational change that happens, and that is in the relationship with God. This is where everything points, because the deepest change that comes from the inner work of leadership is not in the nervous system alone, not in your team dynamics, not even in the self-compassion and the recovery and the honest relationship with your own boundaries. The deepest change is in the quality of presence available to God. The anxious leader who's performing, even for God, brings a managed version of herself to her relationship with God as well as her other relationships. Her prayers are a little too composed. Her surrender is only partial. Her trust is real but conditional, dependent on circumstances going a certain way, on the work being received in a certain way, on the legacy being what she hoped. But the regulated leader brings more of herself, not because she's become more holy, but because she's become more honest. She's learned that being fully known and fully received is possible, that the unmanaged version of herself, the complicated version, the uncertain and sometimes angry and genuinely depleted version is welcome. Not just tolerated, welcome. And from that place, from the experience of bringing all of herself and being received, her faith develops a quality that the performed version never had. It becomes sturdy, not triumphant, not dependent on feeling God's presence in any particular moment, but firm and sturdy. The kind of faith that stays in the room even when the room's really hard. That trusts even when the outcomes are not what was hoped. That says, I don't know how this resolves, And I know that I am held. That quality of faith, the stubborn, unglamorous, been through it and still here kind, is worth more than any spiritual breakthrough experience. And it's built in the ordinary, repeated, sometimes unremarkable practice of bringing your real self to God. In the hard seasons and the quiet ones, in the parking lot and in church, and the 3 a.m. conversation in the middle of the night. It is built in exactly the kind of honesty that this series has been inviting. And it changes everything about how you lead, because the leader who is truly anchored in God leads from a steadiness that's not her own, a peace that does not depend on circumstances, a confidence that's not arrogant but is rooted. Philippians chapter 4 verse 7 describes it as a peace that guards the heart and mind. Not a peace that removes difficulty, a peace that stands watch at the door of the heart, so that what comes in is filtered through something more solid than fear or approval or the unpredictable assessments of the people around us. That is what becomes possible, and it is available. Not to the leader who has it all together, not to the one who never almost quits, not to the one who has never been wounded by the people she invested in most, but the leader who is honest enough to name what was hard, brave enough to do the inner work, and faithful enough to stay in the room long enough to find it. It's available to all of us. The picture I've painted today is real. Every dimension of it, something I've experienced or witnessed in my own leadership journey and in the lives of women I've been privileged to work alongside or walk alongside. But I want to say this. It's not a destination you arrive at and maintain without effort. The regulated leader still has hard days, still has seasons when the anxiety gets loud again, still has moments when the old wound gets touched and the old response fires before the new one can catch up. This work is ongoing. The practice is ongoing. The returning to the honest conversation with God, to the identity that is rooted in something more solid than circumstance, that returning is ongoing. What changes is not that hard things stop happening. What changes is the baseline you return to between them. A regulated leader's hard days are not as hard as they used to be, not because the circumstances are gentler, but because the recovery is faster, the foundation is more solid, and the resources available to meet the next hard thing are more consistently replenished. That is what the work produces. Not a life without difficulty, but a different quality of life within it. And I think that's worth saying plainly, because I don't want you to finish this series and feel like you've failed if the anxiety still visits, or the loneliness still aches, or the almost quitting thought still surfaces. Believe me, this all still happens to me. Those are part of sitting in the chair of leadership. They will always be a part of the chair. What the work gives you is a different relationship with them. More spacious, more grounded, more honest, and more consistently connected to the one who is in the chair with you. I want to close this series with something that's been true for me and I believe is available to you if you're willing to go to these places with me. You're not too far gone. The loneliness has not permanently defined you. The anxiety is not your identity. What you cannot say does not have to consume you. And the work, the honest, unglamorous body and soul and spirit work of tending to yourself as a leader is available to you. Starting now, starting with the next breath, then the next honest conversation with God, the next small choice to tend to yourself the way you tend to everyone else. Now, I'm not standing in some triumphant finish line looking back at you from a place you can't reach. I'm on the path with you, still walking, still doing the work, still returning again and again to the breath and the prayer and the foundation that doesn't shift, but I've been at it long enough to tell you this with confidence. The path does lead somewhere real. The other side of the inner work exists. And the leader you become on the other side, more present, more grounded, more honest, more genuinely useful to the people you lead and the God you serve, is worth every difficult step of getting there. Let's close this series with a prayer together. God, we've spent some time in some of the most honest places in leadership. The loneliness that nobody warned us about, the anxiety that comes with the seat, the weight of carrying things that have nowhere to go, the seasons that brought us close to quitting, the wounds that came from people we've invested in most, and now this vision of what becomes possible on the other side of the inner work. We ask you to make it real for the women listening today, not as a distant aspiration, but as a living, available, genuinely accessible reality. Do the work in us that we cannot do for ourselves. Regulate what's been dysregulated, ground what's been unstable, heal what's been wounded, and build in us, slowly, faithfully, in the ordinary moments of ordinary days, the kind of leadership that flows from a full place rather than an empty one, from presence rather than performance, from identity rather than anxiety, from you rather than from the unpredictable assessments of the people around us. Thank you for the opportunity to sit in the chair. Thank you for the weight of it, because the weight has been the teacher. And thank you for being in it with us. Every hard season, every moment of almost quitting, and every faithful step of staying anyway, you have been there and you will be there still. Thank you. In Jesus' name, amen. My friend, thank you. Thank you for staying with me through this series, for being willing to go to the real places, for receiving what I shared about my own hard seasons with grace and generosity. It's been a really meaningful thing for me to be able to share on this podcast. And remember that the weight of the chair, it's not a problem to be solved. It's the territory of leadership that deserves to be tended with honesty, with wisdom, with faith, and with the community of other leaders who understand the weight from their own chairs. I hope this series has been part of that for you. Until next time, lead well, live well, and be well. Thank you so much for joining me today, my friend. If today's episode encouraged or blessed you, would you please take a minute to leave a rating and written review on Apple Podcast? It means the world to me, and it helps more women like you discover this message of hope and healing. If you're ready to take the next step in your functional health journey, join my interest list at alignvitalityhealth.com. And remember, this podcast is for educational purposes only. It is not intended to be medical advice, nor is it intended to diagnose or treat disease. Please consult your healthcare provider before making changes to your health. Until next time, I'm Tanya Engesether, reminding you that healing is possible and your best season is still ahead.